And welcome back again. Sorry for that befuddlement and hurdle. That is crazy. There was a setting that I couldn't have on if it was marked made for children. I don't think my content is not made for children, but I guess they don't want you to be able to chat if it's made for children. Very, very odd. So welcome. I'm Kari the Mortician, and this is our chance to have you ask me anything you would like to know about the funeral business. This week's coffee chat is brought to you by the NBE Review Coach, the National Board Exam Review Coach company that helps students prepare and study for the National Board exam. So go check them out. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, David, Naomi, Chris, Katie, Fran, movie reviews, Frank, Robin, Dana, Quincy. I love when I get to just read all your names. It's so fun to kind of know who's here. So who is over in England? Tell me if you're over in England. Did you guys see all of the news that Uden Funeral Homes has been getting over there? Just amazing. And to know them personally has been phenomenal, to see them get some good press. So I think that's awesome. Welcome, Jennifer, to your first live. That is so cool. Good morning, Sandy. Hey, everybody. Yay, Lori Beth in Michigan. What part of Michigan are you in? So if you joined me last week, the initial thumbnail asked the question that I never actually answered. So after I had to change the thumbnail to something I actually talked about, I get lost in my ramblings and chatting, and I forget to actually answer some of the questions. So last week, someone had asked, when you get a deceased in, do you brush their teeth? You know, sometimes they've been laying and dying for days or weeks even, and probably haven't had their teeth brushed in a long time. So the simple answer is no. We don't go in with like a toothbrush and toothpaste and brush their teeth. We do sanitize the mouth. There is a lot of funky bacteria in our mouths, alive or dead. And especially when you've died, the bacteria goes rampant, and we want to shut it down where it's at, especially in the mouth. Anything that's super viewable, we want to make sure we get in there and clean and preserve and make sure it's at its best. So we'll get in with special disinfectant solution and clean the nose, the eyes, and in and all around the mouth. Sometimes it's yucky, but what do? That's part of the job. How do you manage removals where rigor mortis is set and the deceased died in a weird position? For example, with their arms open, how do you place them in the bag? Well, we can break up the rigor. We're not breaking anything like a bone or anything. We are moving that muscle and getting that muscle in motion again in the appendage. So we can try to break up that rigor and get the arms down and in a more across the chest position, or we just move them down and then bind them down with the straps that are on the cot. There's 2 seatbelt buckle type straps that we keep the person secured with. So we would put the arms under there and then strap them down, then work more towards getting that person kind of unbent when we get them back to the funeral home. So that's a great question, because sometimes people die in chairs. They die in all sorts of things with arms. This is a one where the arm is above the head. How many of you sleep like that, where your arm's above your head? Well, if you die while you're laying with your arm above your head, your arm's going to be above your head. So we really have to work to get that arm back down. And we'll use weighted bags, like a sandbag. And they're not very heavy. Sometimes just 1 or 2 pounds is all it takes in gravity. And you just lay that on the arm overnight. And that gravity just helps readjust that positioning of the person. You're welcome, Ida. Good morning, Tammy. Just want to thank you. I've heard you advise in the past on taking kids to funerals and teaching about death. We have a funeral today, and I used your advice to tell my kid about a relative who died. Oh, Chris, that's so awesome. So you haven't gone to the funeral yet with your child. So report back maybe next week and let us know how it goes taking your child to the funeral and letting them ask questions. I think it's amazing that just me talking about death and stuff and answering questions alleviates fears. I think it really goes to show that just knowledge can put out some anxiety and fears that we have about anything. So think about other things in your life that make you anxious or nervous. And do you dive in and learn more about those as well? Or is death kind of the big one? Oh no, Jennifer, she says that she wanted to go to school for more choice science, but the school shut down. Is it true that in order to dress the deceased, you sew the clothes to the back of the body? No, 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 no. We do not sew them to the body. We will cut the clothing down the back sometimes. Every funeral director does not do this, but we'll cut it down the back so we can slip it on easier without having to maneuver and roll. And it allows us to tailor it to the individual. We'll then put maybe a stitch up at the neck or down at the waist around the person. We don't stitch it to the person though. I went to an interment at a mausoleum. Why did they seal the casket with plastic wrap and tape? I thought that the casket must not be airtight. So the plastic wrap is going to catch anything if any leaking does happen. That plastic wrap is just an additional step to help protect and catch if anything does leak out of the casket. Hey, Katie Jane. What a fun name that is. Makes me think of like the cutest little baby doll that you could ever have. Hey, Erin, do you offer taking thumbprints or fingerprints of the deceased to give the family for jewelry? Yes, many funeral homes that I know do that, or just out of practice, they fingerprint every single deceased that comes through. It's just their practice. And that way they have it on record. That also allows for, maybe you get the situation where somebody says, well, that wasn't my dad or my mom or something. You at least have some identifiable record for that individual. Thank you for your videos. How long does rigor mortis take to set in? About 2 hours. So it sets in about 2 hours, and it usually leaves about 48 hours after death. But there are many factors that are contributing to this, like medication the individual is on, temperature, where they've died, what they died of. So there's a lot of factors that come into play because rigor mortis is something that's natural inside the fibers of your body and inside your protein and everything of your body. So some medications, just like some medications and some drugs that people may be taking, can counteract against formaldehyde and neutralize it. It's the same thing within our systems. Medications and drugs mess with our systems and the natural course of how nature works. And so things may just not be working in the natural order. I would imagine this has to drive the body farm and everybody who studies that kind of science crazy because there's so many factors that come into play now. Have you seen the new series on oxygen called Exhumed? So fascinating, about unsolved murders that have gone cold and they've exhumed the bodies years later for DNA. I think that's super fascinating. And there's somebody tied to it. There's like a celebrity that kind of is leading or came up and is doing that show. Isn't there, Cody? I saw the commercial, but I haven't watched it yet. So I don't have a lot of TV watching time. And if I do, it's usually some mindless stuff. I'm still on Schitt's Creek right now, guys. I never watched it in the beginning and now I'm on it. And so that's what I watch at the gym for like 30 minutes of cardio or however long one episode takes. And then I'll watch them every once in a while in the evening. I've been trying not to watch TV before bed to try and get better sleep because I am an insomniac lately. I cannot sleep. Quite the battle. What's the most difficult embalming procedure you've had to do? Like the body was real bad with rigor mortis and decay. So here's the thing. You're not going to get both of those typically in the same situation. Typically, when you have decomp, you are past rigor mortis. So the rigor mortis is in the beginning. That decomposition is later usually. I've talked about, though, where sometimes we're getting people that have just died and they're showing decomposition, like the green abdomen and such, because medications are keeping people alive longer while parts of their body are dying. And this is very common now that we're seeing this, which is crazy. But definitely, let's see, some of the most difficult embalming procedures are just handling individuals who have been organ and tissue donors, just because their body's very disconnected. The circulation system within them is very disconnected, and preserving the exposed tissue and things. Sometimes that is one of the more difficult embalming procedures that we run into. I don't know if difficult, it's challenging just to try to make sure we can get everything preserved as well as we can. Is it true that back many years ago, they would put pennies under the eyelids? Someone was talking about recently that they, not under the eyelids, but they would put nickels over to hold the eyes closed, because naturally your body dries and your eyelids are super thin. So that's one of the areas of your body that does dry up quickly. And so your eyes would open. And so when you look at like pictures from long, long ago, I call them Old West pictures, you know, like the 1800s pictures, and they have a coin or something laying on their eyelid just to keep their eyelid closed. So I don't know, penny or not. And thank you guys. Yeah, Kelly Ripa and is it Mark Consuelos? Why I have that information in my brain, I'm not quite sure. But I think that is who it is. I had someone tell me last week I read the questions too quickly, so I'm trying to woosah and slow it down this week. So hopefully that's working for you. Here's a question. I'll throw this out to you guys. If I was to take our coffee chats and roll it into just audio in a podcast that you could pull up the same thing without seeing me and listen to podcast, would that be of interest? Drop comments below in the video comment section and tell me. I need feedback on that. It's just an idea I'm putting out there. To see if people would prefer or like that in addition to this as well. Thank you, thank you. Have you ever experienced a really warm body, like above normal body temperature? I had a patient die back in about 2000, and the person's temp control part of brain went haywire, died with 109 temp. Oh my goodness, I can't imagine. What the challenge of that, or anybody who dies in any kind of maybe an episode where they're in bed and such, is the body does, they do maybe warm right prior to death. And then they're in that bed and under the blankets. And it is like this incubated, decomposing little cocoon. So we may get called a few hours after the person dies, but they're in this little cocoon of heat, and that is breaking down their tissue much faster. And so we may be dealing with skin slip, even though they haven't been dead for days. So we do encounter some things. So I would imagine with somebody who's 109, we'd want to get them cooled down pretty quickly to counteract what that body is naturally going to do. How do you get a ring off of a deceased person after the viewing and before the closing of the casket? Doesn't rigor mortis make it hard to move the hands? So rigor mortis is gone by the time of viewing. Once we've embalmed, we've counteracted what's going on there, like that, the rigor mortis is not an issue. When we get into is if there's arthritis and the person has some kind of a just malformity, that maybe they've had clutched hands for years, or because of some kind of a disease or something they've had, that's how their body has naturally been. Getting rings over those knuckles and such, there's not much we can do. We can't move bone and we can't change bone. If it's a tissue issue, I did just do a video on the ring rescue, which helps compress tissue or displace fluid, depending on what the reason is that the tissue is swollen. I also know a lot of funeral directors who use the string technique or Windex. Who knew? Windex has been like the biggest thing that everybody talks about to use, because it contracts the tissue and makes it a little smaller, long enough for you to try to get the ring off. So Windex and end all be all cure all of everything. Today, guys, I feel like I have this like raspy, throaty thing going on. You should have heard me right when I got up this morning. It was pretty bad. Oh, hope your year is going great. Your personality is so contagious. Your videos bring me so much joy. That is like, you guys don't know how touched I am by some of your comments. Like, it's amazing. How does the makeup for a corpse differ from normal makeup you get at department stores? It depends on the funeral home. Some funeral homes just use Mary Kay or CoverGirl or all the natural makeup. So the thing though is makeup and shave cream and things are created to react to heat or oil that is produced by a living person. So sometimes they don't always work. I don't use like shave cream at all because I just use a lubricant, like a soap or even the shampoo. I'll wash the hair and then put it on the face and then shave with that, just to have a lubricant between the razor and the face, because shave cream really is created to work with the face having heat. So the makeup, some people just use regular everyday makeup. That works the best for them. And it's all about the personal preference of the person getting the deceased ready. Just like anybody who wears makeup, you have personal preference on brands, styles. Some people don't use full foundation. They like a BB or a CC cream, which is like a lighter foundation type thing. So it's really about the personal preference. Some use an airbrush machine to put on makeup on the deceased. It's all personal choice. Thank you, Jennifer. Have a great day. Well, thank you. Oh, we have a nice crasher, party crasher. That's what we're going to do. Don't you love when we get party crashers in the room? So some of these messages, or some of these, this one email, I do have a couple questions left to respond to. So I'm going to answer those quickly. So do you ever dye someone's hair if it's requested by the family? Typically, if the family, I always tell the family, if they want us to really dye the person's hair, they need to bring us the color. We're not going to try and color match or do something. We do have these, I'm going to go blank on the name. It's like rubbing color. And it's what some older people use. And you just rub it on dry hair to color it. And then you blow it dry. And it's just color dye that lasts for however long until you wash your hair again. That works great on the deceased. We don't have to put it on, and do a chemical sort of treatment. And so that works better for us than like a boxed hair dye, because then we got hair dye all over the place and it's messy. It's really messy. So some of that just temporary color works the best to do touch-up colors. How do we dry the deceased after we've washed them? A lot of funeral directors will put the deceased up on blocks, like the positioning blocks, and they'll put them under them so you get an airflow around the whole body. We put a sheet over the top of them when we leave them, or a towel, so that's going to absorb. But just the air drying and getting them up off that table so that air can get under them is going to dry. And we pat dry them, put the lotion on their faces. So we take a lot of care. We want that moisture off. Why do funeral homes have so many curtains? Have you ever been to funeral homes and they have just literally curtains everywhere, like big, heavy, dark drapery? It's not the newer way of doing things, but way back it used to be that heavy, thick drapery and gem colors. Or is that what it's called? Jewel tones, where you had like burgundy and forest green and navy blue, and everything just seemed dark and closing in on you. Well, now the trend is grays and whites and openness and sheer curtains, or, big exposed window walls. And that makes people feel so much more comfortable because they don't feel like they're in a hole, big dark hole when they go to a funeral home. So opening things up and having newer, more contemporary colors and furniture and things has done a world of difference for funeral homes, truly. What happens to things that the deceased is wearing at the time of death? Does the family get it back, or is the deceased buried with it or cremated with it? So if the person is being cremated, then they will typically just have that same outfit on when they go for cremation, unless the family wants them dressed in something else. So that is, that's kind of for cremation. When we receive someone in prior to embalming, we undress them because they're going to be bathed during the embalming, and we'll ask the family if they want the clothing back. A lot of times they'll say, no, just throw it away, but if not, then we'll return it. Some funeral homes wash it always prior to returning it. Some funeral homes don't. It just depends on maybe if they have washers and dryers at the funeral home or anything. Do you think funerals are traumatic for some children? When shouldn't a child go to a funeral? I think that adults are what drive the experience. So say you have an adult who hates going to funerals, thinks it's creepy, thinks all of those things. They're going to impart all of that onto a child that they take to the funeral. And they are going to drive that experience for that child and make that child feel like it's creepy and it's scary and that it's bad. Children derive all of their thoughts and things from who they're around and what they hear and take in. So if you create a positive thought process for a child, taking them into a viewing, then they're going to be more open to asking questions and everything. Yes, children can have a bad experience where they touch somebody and for the rest of their life, they remember a cold, dead person. But if you can explain to them why that person's so cold and everything, that does help too. It's all about the communication and the feelings and thoughts conveyed from the adults around that child to the child. Children deserve to get to have that moment if they want it, where they get to see grandma or grandpa or mom or dad again, because children don't understand finality of death. They don't understand when you say somebody went to heaven or they're sleeping. Bad. Don't ever tell a kid that somebody is sleeping when they're dead. They're always going to be scared of going to sleep from then on. So don't do that. But if you tell them that they've gone to heaven and then you show them a dead body, how did they go to heaven and be in the body? Conceptually, as adults, can you wrap your mind around the soul and the human or in the human body and all of that? Because how can a child even understand that if an adult can't understand that? So it's big concepts. Keeps answers small and brief and honest. Kids can handle these honest questions of death and such. My kids have no idea how my niece was killed. I will not tell them until they're older because I don't want them to derive and think scary things. All they need to know is that somebody died and that they're, buried in a cemetery. We've gone to the cemetery. They don't need to know the how, just that they've died. When they're older, they can learn hows. And just tell kids, when you're older, we'll discuss it further when maybe you know more about the world at hand. But for right now, we're just going to keep it simple. And kids are okay with that for a long time. And then you distract them with something and then they're off. So Lisa, you podcast, of course. So I do have a podcast coming, working. It's in the way beginning works of it. But the concept is all there. The co-host is lined up. You guys are going to love her. She's fabulous. And so that is going to be coming this year. So watch for it. I have to just figure out podcasting, which, it's taken me 4 years to figure out YouTubing and feel like I understand it a little bit. It's interesting. I will say, you guys asked me a lot about, I signed up for notifications or for this or for that. What's really interesting is I got looking at algorithms and at information about like my channel the other day. And only like 11% of my subscribers have notifications, and like there's two things you have to turn on to be notified when I go live and that my videos are up. And there's only like 11% of my subscribers who have one of those turned on, let alone both. And it's a snow day. So my kids are home. Yeah, honey.
Lena's on YouTube.
Okay, thank you.
I think she is.
Okay, she's on YouTube. Okay. Do you like when kids come and tell you what's going on with the other kids? Thank you, honey. I appreciate that. Love you. Can a deceased blood be saved as a blood donor? No. As soon as somebody stops their heart, the blood is useless because it begins to coagulate immediately. So you would have to drain the blood while the person was alive to donate, essentially. And it would depend on all of the medication they were on at the time. So that you cannot donate dead blood, though. Has there ever been a funeral or preparation that made you question whether or not you wanted to stay in the business? It is not a dumb question, Jen. There are literally days where I will walk through the funeral home, wherever I'm at, and I'll look and there's somebody on a table, or there's, a couple people that are dead around. And I'm like, why do we do this? Some days I just question, why do we do this? Why do we get people prepared? Why do we go through all this? Why do we cremate when you see, boxes lined up ready to go to the crematory? Why do we do all these things? And I don't think there's any one easy answer. And I think that's why there's so many different options for us, is because there's no one easy answer for everybody. And so I do question why we do things, and, oh, is this really the right thing for me? I think more so that's why in the last 2 years, this has become such a big part, not advocating for anything, but educating about the business and about the workings and things that go on, and, helping students and helping encourage, and all of that is become such a big part, is because sometimes the other may just not be enough, or it may not be where my heart is every day anymore. But this part I love doing, and, pouring into people and connecting with people, and that part of it I like so much. So I like the balance between both. And if I didn't have the balance, I don't know if I would still be in the business some days. It's such a great question. Matthew asked a really good question. That means I have to go back and find Matthew's question, guys. Funerals back in the day would have the service at the family's home. Have you ever had the request of having the service at the deceased family's home? We don't get that really in this area because it's just not traditional. If you get out to other areas, get out to Washington, Oregon, you're going to get that way more. Often if they're going to do a home burial or something like that. So we really don't get it often here. More maybe like the Amish community definitely goes back home. We had one person, I wasn't working the service, and I can't even tell you how long ago it was or what funeral home, that the family wanted to bring the individual home. The thing we run into is homes are not built to bring caskets in through the door. So we may not be able to get in the home if the person's in a casket. It may not fit. And I believe the one, they had to go through a window to get the casket into the home to do the home viewing, but it did work. And they kept the individual there overnight. But that is a big factor, is doorways. And especially old houses, the door frames are very narrow. Way back in the day, they didn't have caskets built in the sizing. Now they were more very simple little boxes, and they would have the person on a cooling table for viewing. That would help keep the person from decomposing quite as fast. They would then move them into that casket box, because it was still four-sided, so it was still considered a casket, even though many would probably call that a coffin because it's that simplistic style, but it is a casket, and take them out for burial, maybe on the family farm or whatever it is. Who makes the final decision whether a deceased person will have a viewing if the deceased has had a lot of trauma? Really, it's up to the family and the funeral director having a conversation. And if the family really wants to see the individual, then the funeral director can say, you know what, let us do what we can do. And then we'll have you in to see the family or to see the deceased. And then they can make the call. And at least they can view the deceased, because you're still going to be able to recognize their hands or parts of them. As somebody in our industry has said, you can make them perfectly presentable. They just may not be perfect. They may be perfectly recognizable as that person, but they may not look perfect. So then the family can decide at that point if they want everybody to see the individual that way. So it's really up to the family. Thanks, Brenda. Yeah, we do use wax and all sorts of things to do reconstruction. What steps would a person have to take to set up a private family cemetery on a piece of land? Great question, Kelly. I don't know specifically. I believe you have to go through like the EPA and all of that, your local county or city board. You're going to have to get that land deemed as a cemetery, and all the titles and deeds have to be transferred into where it says a dead person is buried here, essentially, on that title, because everybody ever after needs to know what that land is and have it earmarked. So it's not unheard of, but there is definitely steps that you have to go through, and it depends on this, like I said, the state, the county, or city. No, Lisa, not everybody is fingerprinted. Some funeral homes do it routinely and some do not. If a person on death row is executed and they then taken to a funeral home to be embalmed or cremated, or what happens to their body, is there a funeral for them as well? They will go to get an autopsy, and then the family's still in charge of them. It is their family member. So after the autopsy, they will then go to whatever funeral home the family chooses. So they're basically released at that point from the judicial system. How am I coping with COVID? Well, we did have a big surge in cases, just like everywhere has seen. It started about, September, October last year. And every funeral home I've talked to has been like double capacity. It's been very busy. And it's not just been all direct cremation. I think a lot of people not being able to do things for a while has driven people wanting to do things. And so a lot of burials, casket companies are having some challenges, some of them because they're not able to get caskets and they're having to do free upgrades. And that part has been a challenge. I've heard from multiple funeral directors as well. Also creating backlogs of individuals for crematories because we have the paper waiting and only to being able to cremate so many people in a certain time period. And so it just takes longer. And so you're going to find areas of the country where it's taking 2 weeks to get cremated remains back, if not longer. And cemeteries are backlogged. So it's taking a month before you can get in for a burial. So these are not uncommon things. And I've had a lot of people ask me questions on these things. Like, what are they doing wrong at the funeral home? It's not that there's anything wrong. It's that if all funeral homes are handling double the call volume, that means double the business for everybody in the industry, the crematory, the cemetery, the flower company, the headstone, everybody, the vault company. So you have to put that into account. Everything is slowed down and things are not happening as quickly as people would like them to happen. I know it's really frustrating for families, but it's frustrating for us too, that we can't do things in your timeline. And that means death certificates are delayed. Social Security and switching over of things is delayed greatly as well. Yes, COVID-19 is still active on a deceased. It's been found up to 90 days after. So their deceased are very, very contagious when we get them at the funeral home. Matt, that's a good question. I've always wondered if embalmers take before and after pictures for their portfolio and for the file of the deceased. Some places do, but legally, you cannot take a picture of a deceased without the consent of the family. It needs to be on something that they sign. Oftentimes, the embalming authorization may have on there that photos may be taken for educational purposes or for the deceased file or something like that. It's always encouraged, do not use your cell phone. Everything on a cell phone is not temporary. It's kind of a forever thing. So you want to use an old school camera, that you can then put the file right where you want it to go. It doesn't go into the World Wide Web, and it's just where you want it to be. How do you help families deal with complicated grief? Have you had any experience with unusual grief? The thing with grief is it's all over the place. And so many people think, the funeral that's going to be some closure for me. I hate the word closure, guys, because there's no closure. Grief is an open-ended, eternal thing that you will forever go through because your relationship didn't end by your choice or the deceased choice, really. It ended because of death. And it's this lack of control over a situation that brings on this grief that's kind of unlike anything else. So it always is lingering. Even 20 years after somebody dies, you can still hit that moment of just sorrow that you didn't know existed in you, because grief is its own thing. So it's not going to look the same for any families that I work with or deal with or take care of. You have some people who will never marry again. You have some people that get married in a week or 2 weeks. Like, I've seen people get married like a month after they had a funeral for somebody because I don't know. Yeah, grief does crazy things, guys. It does crazy things. Should a funeral director or shouldn't play mediator between children as next of kin for a parent or two divorced parents of a child. One wants burial or wants cremation or other differences. How handled? So it all depends on the funeral director a little bit on this. The law states that children all have equal parts when it comes to giving direction for disposition and everything, unless the deceased has signed a designation form to one child to be in charge. So technically, we need to listen to every child equally. Now, some funeral directors will go by whoever's paying gets more power, but legally, you take out the cost factor and all those kids have the equal say, and you have to take a majority of what they want. So you may have one kid who is adamant against cremation, but if the other two want it, then they trump. So it does get sticky, but we are not mediators per se, but we do help to have some conversations to maybe come with some middle ground. Maybe you have a viewing before the cremation, and that's all the person really wanted, was to make sure they could have a public viewing, but they didn't know they could have that with cremation. And I have encountered that, where people who choose cremation or think cremation is just a direct disposal, but it's not. Cremation is a disposition choice, and it's the services beforehand that you're choosing. And if you choose a direct cremation, that is the service choice, not the disposition choice. Does that make sense? So sometimes that confusing part and helping to explain it to families is a bigger thing. Now, when you have divorced parents, that definitely gets into another factor. You need to know on the divorce decree who had physical and legal custody of the kids, because by the court, since it's a physical thing that you're dealing with the child, that's part of, like, it would fall under like the medical and everything. So if one parent was appointed medical for that child, that would possibly fall under that. I would always go back to the judge and make sure you're legally covering your butt, because neither of them trump each other in one essence. But with the divorce decree, if one parent has sole legal custody and physical custody, then that parent technically would probably have the right to give the disposition. So, but then we also have to follow other mortuary laws. So it gets into a sticky that we really have to get into. I know funeral directors aren't really allowed to show emotions, but you ever really got emotional or cried at a service? I never really have. And it's not that it's bad, but if I'm focusing on me and my emotions, then the family's almost like, oh, great, she can't take care of us because she's over there crying and she didn't even lose somebody. So what is going on? It's that perception of maybe not being completely in control of the funeral and the situation by looking like I'm losing my poo over here. And I'm not saying there's anything bad about a funeral director crying at a funeral. We're all going to have ones that we tear up. I've never lost myself at a funeral. I have after. I may get in the car after the cemetery and like just lose my crap the whole way driving back to the funeral home. It just depends. And it may not even be a moment that anybody else would get emotional about, but there may be a specific song that just clicks in a way to me, or there may be something else. And so it just depends on what it is. Sometimes taps still catches me up at a military service. So you just never know. Jen asks, have you ever had a paranormal experience in the funeral home? I have, Jen. I'm going to make you go watch my paranormal experience video. So just search my channel for paranormal and it should pull it up. So one last question I'm going to answer. What is the difference between a funeral, I'm guessing you mean funeral home, versus mortuary? So they're really essentially the same thing now. Back in the day, the funeral home was the place that you had the service and such, and the mortuary is where the deceased was held. So like even in England, the word mortuary is used more for like a morgue. And that reflects more where the person was held. either the prep room or a morgue or essence. And then the funeral home was where you had people come visit to visit the deceased for the visitation or service. But now they're essentially used one and the same. And it's funny because places here in Michigan are not really called mortuary, but if I go out to like California, I run into more, you know, such and such mortuary and such. So it's interesting that regionally it's just a word that's used and such. So, well, thank you all for joining me. I hope I spoke a little more clearly and enunciated better and didn't rush through things so that I could allow you to hear a little better. And I think it also, when it closed caption, if that does on every video, I think works better as well. It's maybe more understandable for everything. So Nicole, I'm sorry you had lost your uncle last week. I need a fan group on Facebook. You can start it, Leo. You're in charge. I am in Southwest Michigan between Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids. So pull out your map where we are. So thank you guys for everything. And I'll see you next week on our Coffee with Kari segment. Every Tuesday, we have that 2-minute video, but make sure you click subscribe so you can easily get back to the channel. Click and make sure you get notifications and give thumbs up, share videos, help people to find information they've been maybe seeking their whole life about the death care industry. Thanks, guys. Bye.